Welcome back everyone to another episode of Coding with Kevin. Today is part 2 of our SQL to front-end full stack tutorial. I really appreciate y'all tuning in. If you want to support me, check out the links in the description down below. But without further ado, let's get back into things. Alright, so this is where we left off last time. And what we want to do is start getting this set up to connect to the front end. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, uncomment these. And we are going to change them to post requests. Post, not plural. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to uncomment all of these as well. And we're going to add app.use, we're going to do express.json at the end of that, and then we're going to do app.use, I believe it's express.encoded URL encoded, there we go. And what these are going to allow us to do is they're going to allow us to take our JSON that we're going to pass from the front end to our server, and then we're going to be able to destructure or access the body of our JSON using this. Now we're going to uncomment this down here. We're going to make sure it's going to be listening on our port. We're going to hit save. And then down here, we're going to do npm I, and we're going to do npm-run all. Go ahead and get that installed real quick. Now the reason why we did that is because in our package JSON, we're going to create a script where we can start the server and build our React app at the same time. We're going to do dev, and there's going to be a nice command called run-p, and then we're going to do server start, add a comma at the end of that. So run-p is essentially run parallel. Server is this command we have down here, and start is this script that we have up here. All right, so now we're going to hop back over to our server.js, and we're going to go ahead and comment these out, because when we run our server, we don't want to add more people to our server. So we're going to do now npm run dev. And you can see here, it's going to start our nodemon, start our demo server. Ah, crap, and I forgot to save. So it did add Pam to the database. All right, I think that's fine though. So I will bring it on over here. And we see that we have a button and text. And this text is simply just something that I already have built in from the full stack coding challenge that this is all built off of. So when we go into it, we go to app.js, and we can see here that hello is there because we're doing it inside of use state. That's fine. We're going to go ahead and do some basic setup though. So in here, we're going to go ahead and create about 5 input fields. So we're going to do input, and then I hold Shift Alt down to essentially just copy the line down. So go ahead, input, there. There's 5. Awesome. We're gonna do a type for the first field of number. We're gonna do name of employee ID. We're going to do a placeholder of employee ID, and then, capital E. And then we are going to do, we're just going to create kind of a on-change event, but we're not going to go ahead and edit it just yet. So we'll just do some empty brackets. Now go ahead and copy this into the rest of the input fields. So a nice shortcut that I use is Control Alt down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, and that makes your cursor move to all the lines. I do then Control V, and that pastes it all in there. So we're gonna go ahead and remove type number from all of them except for the first and the fourth line. And the reason being is the first one's employee ID, the fourth one is age, right? So in our SQL database, we defined them to be a type of number. So now we're gonna go ahead and just match these fields to the column titles of our database. So we have first name, last name, over here is going to be age, and this last one is going to be gender. So a nice little organizational thing I like to do is indent all of these. So do something kind of like that. That just makes it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more readable to other developers when you're working on it. I'm going to go ahead and just make that change to the rest of these too. So now you can see it just looks a little bit nicer. For some of you it might not. It took me a little bit to appreciate this kind of style of organization, but when you get into the corporate world and start working with code, this tends to be easier to work with. So anywho, now what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and create a place for our data to be displayed on the front end. Okay, and how we're going to do that is we're going to type in something like this, and we can see that we have return data there in our brackets. We're going to do return data dot employee ID, close the curly brackets, and I'll explain how this will work later on, but for right now, Shift Alt 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to change all these to match these up here. Okay, so now you can see that. I'm going to hit save, and it's going to say, hey, we've got a syntax error. Obviously, if you guys probably caught it, I didn't put a N in the on change. So easy way to do this, I hit Control D, and it catches all of them. And then I tab over on change, save. It's still going to say we have a syntax error because it's an empty bracket. That's fine. Let's just go ahead and create what we need to put in that bracket. And actually, for right now, let's go ahead and just see how this looks on the UI. So I'm going to just cut these. So Control X, just so we can like move forward and see what it looks like. And we can see here we have all of our names, things. They all say employee ID, so we need to change the placeholder of those. But these are all input fields. They look fine. We'll do a little bit of editing with CSS to make it line up a little bit here to the center of the page too. So we go down here. Let's go ahead and change this. First name, last name, age, gender, hit save. Great, now we can see the placeholders match our input names. And then we're gonna hop over here into the CSS, and we're gonna go ahead and work in the app here and just do some basic CSS styling. So we're gonna define a height of 100 view height. Display. If you can't tell, I really like grid. Some people like flex. I prefer grid. I do use the two together, but yeah, it is what it is. And if you're not a CSS educated, that's okay. I'm gonna kind of just breeze through this here, just so we can make sure all of our stuff looks good in the screen. Okay, sweet. So now that will bring everything to the center, okay? And so ideally what we want to have happen is we're going to create another button here. Let's just do that here real quick. And and a Control Shift or Shift Alt down. We're going to call this create, save, back to the UI. There we go. So what we want to have happen is when we want to create an employee, we want to fill out the fields here, capture it, send that employee to the backend, to our server, which then will create that employee in the database. We'll then get the response from the server, sending that employee information back to the front end, where it will display on the right side of these fields. Now, if this employee is already created, we can simply just look them up by sending a request to the backend to look up, hey, is Jim Halpert created or is Pam created, right? That's our goal for this. This will be a really brilliant way to show to employer that you are capable of taking data, manipulating it, and displaying it on the UI. Essentially the job of a full stack developer. A nice benefit to that is usually full stack devs start anywhere between like $60,000 to $80,000. And if you can do this, make sure, again, you want to be able to do what you say you can do. So if you're just following this tutorial, make sure you're upfront with them saying, hey, you know, this was just a small project that I made to show somebody how to create data and show it on the front end and the back end, right? But if you take the time to actually learn these skills, React, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can actually start pretty well off around like $60,000 to $80,000. All right, with that being said, now we're gonna dive back into here and we're gonna go ahead and create our way to capture all of these fields, all right? Up here, we're gonna do another use state. So, and I did the wrong brackets. I need to do square brackets, not curlies. Equals use state. By the way, they're going to ask you in an interview, can you tell us about React hooks? Use state is a hook for functional components. When React was first created, there wasn't such a thing as functional components. It was all class components. And you would define a state in the class component. Now what we're able to do with functional components is essentially use a state that can be kind of created in individual components where we're not having one parent state now that we have to deal with. Takes a little bit of organizational skills to work with. You got to know what you're doing, but that's essentially why we're using use state. So we're going to go ahead and create our column names and values here in use state. So employee ID, we're just going to have a temporary value of 0. First name, empty string. Same with last name, empty string. Age, this is going to have a default of 0, and then gender is going to be an empty string. Exactly how we just want a default values to be before we start passing things in. Go ahead and hit save. It's going to build. That's fine. It's going to say employees not assigned, set employee and set. We're going to go ahead and do that. So for our input fields, we need to capture the input as it's being typed. So we'll create a function called input set. Let's call it set input. Yeah, that's a bit more literate. We're going to pass an event in there, and then we're going to go ahead and destructure the event, okay? That's a little bit more of an advanced concept, destructuring. Essentially, so e.target in the browser has sub values, right? So it could have e.target.value, .child, .name, .parent, right? These are all values or sub-values of target. We want to just extract name and value from this value. We're getting a couple errors here, probably because I had a typo. Bada boom. All right, so let's just go ahead and see that in action. So we're gonna go ahead and log value. We're gonna hit save. We need to go ahead and in our input fields, we're gonna go ahead and highlight that, Control D, all the way down. And we're gonna add back our onChange handler. So onChange equals curly brackets, set input, should be just fine like that. Hit save. And we're gonna see it now on the UI. We're gonna right click, inspect, and I'll go ahead and affix this to my sidebar. Bada boom. We're gonna go to console, and now we should be able to see if I type something in, it's not working. Why does it have? Because we have an improper onChange handler. Oh yeah, another typo. Hey, you know, I gotta be real with you guys. Sometimes it's nice to see somebody messing up in real time, because this could potentially happen during your interview. Capital onChange. There we go. So now we should be able to see in real time the value of the fields, we'll go to gender, is being printed out and captured. Awesome. So now we need to figure out what do we want to do with that value. Okay, well, so we go up here and we need to create a conditional statement. And this is trial by error, but we need to make sure that fields that require a number in our database are going to actually be sent to the server as a number. By default, when we package this up, it will be created and sent as a string. You know, even putting the type number here, unfortunately, doesn't convert it to a number. This is saying, hey, in this input field, all we're going to accept is numbers. So example, if I go to employee ID and I try to type ABC, right, nothing's happening. But if I type 1, 2, 3, it only allows numbers to be typed in that field. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna say if name, right, so e.target.name, which is going to be these, if name is exactly equal to, that's how I remember the triple equals, exactly equal to employee ID, or name is exactly equal to age, then we need to do something. We need to go ahead and store these values, but we need to also convert them to a number. So we're gonna say set employee. We're gonna take the previous state, pass that in, and we're gonna essentially spread out the previous state. And then we want the field name that we're looking for to parse int value. Okay, so parse int essentially is going to take a string and convert it to a number if it is a number, right? So if it's a string of like 1, 2, 3, it's going to convert it to a number of 1, 2, 3. Now, if it's a string of ABC, this is going to throw an error. So what's happening here? Essentially, everything that existed before, so these default values are going to stay the same, except for the field that we're currently typing in. And if it is employee ID or age, we're going to convert the value to a number and store that. So what if it's not a employee ID or age? Okay, well, let's get to that. First, we're going to return out of this if statement, and this is something called return early. Typically, if you're a beginner dev, what you'll do next is you'll do an else, right? So if those conditions aren't matched, else do this. When you have a return statement at the end of your if, that's called return early, you no longer need the if statement. So essentially, we can go ahead and just copy this, paste it below, and then now just have value there. So if it's employee ID or age, we're going to go ahead and run this code to convert the string into a number, and we're going to return, which essentially skips this code here. However, if it's not employee or age, all this code is going to be skipped, and this is going to be run. Exactly what we want. So let's give a live demonstration. How can we see if this value is working, right? We're going to go down here. We can see that our click is calling fetch data. Awesome. Since we haven't done anything with it yet, let's just comment it out. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to console log employee. And then that way we can see if this is actually being saved correctly or not. So let's go here. We're going to go ahead and refresh just so we can clear out all the fields. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and first name Bob, and let's click. Look at that. We can see here that employee ID is 1, 2, 3, first name is Bob, and then everything that we haven't assigned a value yet still has our defaults. Age is 0, gender and last name are still empty strings. This is exactly what we want. Okay, so now that we have that, we need to go ahead and we need to pass this data now to the backend. We need to be able to fetch a employee if they're already created and display the results. And then we need to pass information to an employee that we want to create to the backend. So we're going to go ahead, uncomment that out. We're going to change this to API, and we're going to change this to post. All right. Now remember, in our package JSON, we have a proxy of our localhost 5000. So essentially what's going to happen is we can see here that our project is listening on port 5000, but it's also running locally on 3000 here, okay? That's just our front end connecting to our back end. And when we create a post request, we want to make sure that we edit here in this method the same as we have it for our call in the backend. If this is get and we forget to change that to a post, it's going to say, hey, we can't find that call. And I'll actually just show you that in real time. So we'll do a refresh, bada boom. We'll do Jim and click. Well, I guess it didn't do what I thought it would. I didn't save it, did I? I didn't. So let's save that. Now refresh. Now if I click Jim, I click, you see it's going to say post 3000 API can't be found. That's because we're not connected to a post request on the server. So now if we do change it to post, I'll comment that out real quick, but we can see that it should work. Click. See, we don't get that error now. And if we look in our network tab, we can see that the API is expecting a result back, but we just commented that out. So it's obviously not going to get a result back. However, we can see that it was called because we are logging called. And so it was called. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now we're going to go ahead and copy this. We'll uncomment it first. We're going to copy it and bring it up here. Paste. Now we're going to delete this part, and we're just going to have that for right now. Now, what we're going to do is also change this to an asynchronous arrow function. because we need to wait for this operation to finish. So we're going to store it in a variable. So we'll do const result equals await. All right, and this is called async await. The description's in the title. But we need to wait for this operation to get called, right? So when we get employees, it's going to go ahead, reach out to the database. We also need to create an await here. It's going to reach out to the database, grab all these. Then once that's finished, it's going to store it in this variable, and we're going to return that variable. We need to wait for all of that to happen to store it here in result. And then what we're going to do is we're going to return the result. So we'll save that. We need to save the operation. We also now need to pass in some information from the front end to the back end here. So when we go to our app.js, we can see that we're going to create a post request. But what we need to do is we need to now have a body. And we need to pass JSON to the backend. And in order to do that, we need to essentially stringify our data. I'm not going to go into too much depth how this works. That's the power of Google if you're really curious. But we're going to do name, and we're going to do employee dot first name. Oops, first name. Boom. Okay, we're going to save that. It looks like this should all be good, right? That's being saved. We're logging out the new data. What we then need to do is we need to essentially just get the first array of data. So we can see here that we are outputting an array of employees. All right, so we're going to click save. Why is that being operated? Oh, well, it's because we have that uncommented. Oops, we need to delete that, save it, and now it shouldn't be creating PAM again. But we're going to go ahead, refresh the front end. We'll do console. First name is going to be Jim. When I click, we're going to get a whole bunch of errors. What's going on here? Well, it can't read property of employee ID of undefined. So that's in app.js line 67. Hey, that makes sense. So something went wrong with our call. Let's find out what went wrong. So we can see here that we did receive data back. We received 2 results back of Jim and Pam. So let's figure out why that happened. Okay, we're going to go back into our VS Code. We're going to go to DB operations, and this makes sense. When I got a little bit too excited, when we were passing this, we didn't actually create anything to be passed to our getEmployee function yet. So we're going to do rec.body.name. We're going to save. Now here, we're going to pass in that name, but we're going to call it first name. And now in our query, we need to go ahead and write essentially, hey, we want only this person that matches this first name. So with JavaScript, we need to go ahead and create something called a backtick instead of quotes. So select all from employee demographics where first, oh my lord, first name equals string, then $, curly brackets, first name. So now what's going to happen is we added this where clause, so we should only see, we need to end with a quote, so we need a quote in the beginning and the end. So if Jim's passed, we should get Jim, and if Pam is passed, we should get Pam. Let's save it and see what happens. We're going to go ahead and refresh. Let's type in Jim, click. All right, so we did receive a record set of that, and it's of an array. So let's see what we need to figure out. All right, if you've been thinking hard, we can see here that it's sending an array of objects with the name of record set. So simply the solution is result dot record rd record set. And then we'll choose the first object in that array. That should match. Now I clicked save. Let's refresh. We'll type in Jim, click, and there we go. We have just retrieved all of Jim's information from the database after creating a call to our server, and it passed all of that, and we displayed it here on the front end. That is beautiful. If you can just keep practicing this before you get into an interview, like, you'll blow them away with this project. But now what we want to do is we also want to create an employee. So let's go ahead and do that next. All right. So what we're going to do down here is we're going to uncomment that, copy it here, and we're kind of going to do the same thing. So we're going to do a async await, change this to async, and we're going to add an arrow function there. Okay. We're going to do the same thing here, and we're going to go ahead and pass in a request.body. We're going to go ahead, copy that, and we'll leave that for right now. And then we're also going to go ahead and just copy this, because it's gonna do the exact same thing. So what we're doing here is we first want to create an employee in the database. Now we have to wait for that to happen. Then we want to get employees, narrow it down to that one that was just created, and then pass that back to the front end. Right? And if we look here at our DB operations, we have create employee, which is already set up to accept an employee object, where we assign all of the parameters that fit the column names, and then it's going to go ahead and return an employee. We need to await that to happen, save it, and save that. All right, now we'll move on to the front end. How are we going to go ahead and pass all that information in? We essentially need to create another call to our database. So we're going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to call it create employee. All right. So it's going to follow the same structure, but this time we're going to just spread out our employee object. Okay. And again, Google what the spread operator is. It'll make a lot more sense. But essentially, it's going to go ahead and do this for us right here. So it's just going to spread it all out for us. We're going to go ahead and keep all this the same because we're still going to get the data in the same way. But we now need to go ahead and change this call here, okay? So now we need to do create employee on our create button. Let's review everything. It looks good. So now we go here. We're going to go ahead and refresh the page. So let's do employee ID of 1005, and we'll do Dwight. I believe his last name is Schrute, and I don't know, is he like 33 or something? We'll call it male. And so now we're going to go ahead and create Dwight Schrute in our database. Let's see if this works. Hey, something went wrong. That's awesome. So cannot read property employee ID of undefined. That's on line 83. Cool. We can also see that an empty array was given to us when we logged our new data. So what happened? I can see here, this is what happened. We need to change this to hello. That's all right. I try not to cut these things out, these mistakes, because you guys got to see, you know, I try not to be fake for you all. So now that it's correct, let's refresh the page. Try this again. So 1005, Dwight, Schrute, 33, male, create. Hey, and something happened again. So let's figure out what happened there. Okay, so we're gonna go back to our code, and it looks like this is correct. So we're gonna go here to our server. So because we are spreading our data when we're doing it here, there is not a name object. So we do need to go ahead and define that we want first name to be sent along with our getEmployees function. So now that should be the solution here. So 105, Dwight, Schrute, 33, male, and now when we click create, there it is. That is all, folks. So we can see here it was created twice. So because the getEmployees function wasn't working, that did not mean that our createEmployees function was not working. So you can see down here in my console too, that we did have 2 instances of Dwight created. But this is it. This is the way that you can go ahead and display data from a database onto a UI. This is a full stack developer project. This can be a great thing for your portfolio, and I'm really happy you all had this ride with me. One last note is just make sure you clean up a couple things. Like, we're obviously not using this employee class that I created, so you can delete this file. Go ahead and delete that import there. Get rid of any console logs that you have. You don't want any of that being created in your project. Get rid of this. Obviously, we're not using this code anymore. So just basic cleanups before you go ahead and get this actually put in your portfolio. But then when you are able to talk about it, you have something that looks clean, something that works, and something that helps demonstrate your skill on your SQL and database capabilities. Awesome. I'm so happy y'all made it through the end of this. If you can accomplish this on your own and you end up learning how to do React, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, all those things, you have the skills to become a full stack developer. It's a very valuable asset to have in the world of web development, whether you want to be a backend developer or a front-end developer. If you can do all these, you have the world wide open at your fingertips. So I really appreciate y'all tuning in. Thank you so much. Until next time, take care.